Welcome everyone. Thanks for your interest in this workshop. I'm Alessandra and I'm really happy to be here today to give you a crash course in design principles for visual communication, VisCom for short. I'd like to start by acknowledging and offering my respect to the Gadigal of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the country on which the university campus is located, and also to the Gumnagurra and Darug peoples, who are the traditional custodians of the country on which I live and from where I'm speaking today. As we engage in our learning, may we do so in ongoing acknowledgement of all aspects of the country on which it takes place. I'm a PhD student here in the Department of Gender and Cultural Studies and a teacher in the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. And for the past 20 years, I've been a graphic designer and art director. And I didn't imagine these worlds coming together until I realised that presentations, lectures, and tutorial slides, posters for conferences, and creative modes of assessment are a significant part of academia. I have a lot of experience in creating communication materials, and over the years I've reflected on my practice to distill some design principles for effective communication. And I'd like to share these with you. Today we're focusing on visual communication, VisCom, to help create engaging and effective slides, posters, flyers, presentations, and so on. First up, I want to mention the question of, does anybody really care about this stuff? Surely the most important thing is the ideas, the text, the argument, the innovation, etc. Not true. Because if you're in charge of communicating these ideas and they're not translating into your medium, then your content won't reach your audience. People engaging with these materials may not consciously care whether they look appealing or communicate well, but they know when the materials aren't working. They know when the materials distract from or confuse the message, and they know when the materials enhance it. As a quick example to start off with, this slide here. This is my acknowledgement of country slide, which shows a landscape with some wattle and a blue sky in the distance, and a bush track going through. It has the text on it in white, never ceded, C-E-D-E-D. What are your thoughts about how this slide works with my acknowledgement of country at the start of this workshop? Consider what work this slide's doing, what message it conveys, how it does this, what you get from it, and what might not work for you. This slide isn't duplicating my words, and it's not duplicating the message in the acknowledgement of country. It's an additional but integrated piece of communication that serves a purpose. In this case, my purpose in showing the text never ceded over a picture of landscape is to convey an aspect of country that I think is important, that in Australia, so many of us are on stolen land. So now, to orientate you to what we'll be covering. As my slide summarises, we'll look at what VisCom is and what it can do. We'll look at 3 questions to ask yourself to get clear on the purpose of your communication. We'll go through some design tips for putting your materials together, and we'll finish with an overview of some useful technology for creating VisCom materials. Accompanying this video workshop is a transcript which also includes additional links and resources. So first up to VisCom. When we're talking about creating slides, posters, etc., we're talking about using a visual language. Images, motion, graphics, graphs, and text are all components of this language. You can see examples of these on my slide. There's in the top left, there's a slide from a presentation which shows a rough bookcase in a warehouse space in Sydney's Surrey Hills with the text untranslated space on it. Below that is some materials produced by Amnesty International conveying the human rights work that they're doing, quite graphic with their bold brown colour of yellow. In the centre, we can see a rough diagram, a kind of thumbnail sketch of aspects of regional culture and festivals in Australia, showing aspects such as gigs and exhibitions, really just a rough sketch. Below that, we've got a word cloud of Favourite television programs, taken from one of the units that I teach at Sydney Uni. And on the right, we see a poster from an exhibition printed onto metal as part of an installation in the Tin Sheds Gallery. That's my dad on that poster, talking about his architectural work that he did at Sydney Uni and New South Uni. So as a language, VisCom can help explain and emphasise, it can help argue and galvanise and so on. And VisCom does these things differently from how written or oral language does them. And sometimes VisCom does them better. Done well, VisCom is not just an adjunct, but an integral component of messaging. And VisCom is not only a visual component of messaging. In order to create effective communication, visual elements must be accompanied by rich description. And this can be audio or text-based, or ideally both. A simple way to do this when presenting is to describe your visual material, like I've been describing the slides in this workshop, and or to include this description in your transcript. The reason for including rich description is to enhance your material's communicative reach. This type of enhanced communication is often referred to as accessible because it specifically attends to creating communication which provides the opportunity for engagement based on preferences and abilities. Attending to these aspects of communication and making them an ordinary and integrated part of your materials not only gives your materials and so your message the best chance of having wider reach to people with particular requirements, but actually makes the communication better for everyone because it creates multi-dimensional communications that allow for multiple modes of engagement. I want to make the point here also that VisCom has nothing to do with art or artistic ability. And fancy VisCom isn't a substitute for high quality content, for style over substance. VisCom has everything to do with strategy. Visual elements used as more than just eye candy or decoration. Visual elements selected and included as vitally considered and integrated components of communication. As well as a strategic tool, VisCom is also a tool of creativity. And I don't mean what's sometimes called big C creativity, in which creativity is framed as some kind of rarefied, advanced skill or even an innate talent. I mean little c creativity, that ordinary and wonderful ability that everyone has to engage in a process of play and exploration, trying things out and finding new ways. Little c creativity is also at play when your audience encounters your materials and these materials spark new ideas. Creativity as a collective endeavour. In academic training, we all practice using words as tools for our purposes. Developing your skills with VisCom will expand your repertoire and your reach. One final point on framing. When you're creating your VisCom materials, make it easy for your audience to interact with your materials. And also, leave your audience some room. VisCom doesn't have to be literal or descriptive or convey a dense amount of information. It can communicate by kindling, evoking, and suggesting, by plotting points. So, use a light touch, invite and trust your audience to engage and to make their own connections. Now, to purpose. When you're creating a piece of communication, it's vital to be clear about why you're doing this. So, what's the purpose of the piece of communication? What work do you want it to do? What action do you want it to achieve? What change do you want it to make? Being clear about the purpose will help you to create materials that serve that purpose. A simple guide to creating effective comms is to ask yourself these 3 questions that I have on the slide here. Question 1, what is the story? What's the key message of this piece of communication? Question 2, who are we telling this story to? Who are the intended recipients of this message? And question 3, what do we want them to do when they've encountered it? What's the desired outcome or outcomes of the piece of communication? When you have clear answers to those questions, you can then decide what elements to include in your communication in order to achieve your purpose. So, getting into some detail now and thinking about how you need your piece of communication to work. How will you use it? How might others use it? Does it accompany a talk or does it need to stand alone? Consider the function of the visual elements. Do they help explain, highlight, juxtapose, evoke, provoke, or create a mood? When you're designing your piece of communication, use the space and the components strategically. If it's a presentation, consider sequence, time, and timing. All elements of your piece of communication, that's text, images, graphics, videos, graphs, etc., should be a deliberate choice designed to serve your purpose. On my slide here are 4 slides from a presentation of some of my own work on warehouses in Surrey Hills. In the top left, you can see Hibernian House, which is also on my t-shirt today, with just the simple title, Hibernian House, in the middle of it. It's a big, about 6-story building with beautiful bay windows, looking a little bit rough, as warehouses do. On the right-hand side, top right, there's a slide of the top of one of those window panes with the text from Robert Montgomery that says, "The city is wilder than you think and kinder than you think." On the bottom left, the slide's divided into 4 vertical panels with background shots of warehouse interiors and 4 quotes from interview participants overlaid over the top of them. And finally, on the bottom right, we've got a slide of the rooftop of Hibernian House and its famous graffiti gallery with the title Edgelands. It's centered in the slide. And these were slides that were designed to convey just a real sense of the place to accompany my presentation. So, here are some tips for putting it all together. Firstly, text. When using text elements for headlines or highlighted text, you might like to consider the typeface or the font as the voice of the text and select this accordingly. For example, as you can see on my slide, some grey text that says, "Is your text calm?" Underneath, there's some red text in italics that says, "Or maybe urgent." And finally, a third line of text in bold black that says, "Is your text forceful?" Keep it simple though, because legibility and coherence are important. When we're talking about graphics and non-text elements, they're not just adjuncts or eye candy. They should be vitally considered and integrated components of the whole. They're strategic elements that serve a purpose, enhancing and adding dimension to your communication. So you can see here on my slide, we have a slide from just a mock presentation about music festivals in Australia. There's a picture of someone dancing on stage in a black background, and overlaid is some white text with a little pull-out quote. So this image is conveying what the text is talking about in terms of the live performance and accompanying the text in a very strategic way. On to the next slide. I want to make the point as well, the previous slide's very visual, very rich, it's dark, has a lot of colours, red and black, but simplicity helps clarity. So deal well with the material in the space that you have available without being tempted to cram too much in. So by contrast, here's a slide again from the same mock presentation, and it shows 3 just wireframe outlines of an iPad app and how this might work as a component of this mock presentation about live music in Australia. There's simple text, a simple use of colour, red, to pull out a couple of items of the text. And overall the slide is very, very white, just showing an alternative way to present information. When you are presenting information on the page, consider the glanceability of each page. That is, offer a hierarchy of information so people can engage in tiers, so they know where to look first and where you want them to look next. For example, The first tier is a headline, and that gives an overall sense of the page content. The second tier is subheadings, giving more detail. Third tier is body text and so on, expressing your message fully. And you can also use some pull-out text to highlight important points, give a flavour of the information on the page, or act as a teaser to engage interest. On my slide here is an example of that kind of text hierarchy, again from this mock presentation. We've got a headline which is clear, it's the largest text on the page, followed by some pull-out text in red. We have some subheadings giving someone a sort of glanceability look at the pages, and they show the disciplines involved in the presentation: English, media and communication, politics and international relations, sociology and digital cultures. And beneath each of those subheads is the body text, which conveys more detail about these aspects of the presentation. And finally, onto text, in this section about practicality. When you're using text, set text for legibility and for smooth reading. So 3 examples here on my slide. Be sparing with words set all in capital letters. This can come across as shouty. In my slide here, we have the words, having too many words in capital letters can come across as shouty. And secondary text, just showing the words for impact, be sparing in capital letters. Avoid having single words on their own line at the beginning of a heading or a paragraph. So in the middle of my slide here, we have the line, avoid having single words on their own, and then on the next line, line. Beneath that is some text set that's more easy to read and just says text is easier to read when it doesn't have dangling words. This might seem like a small thing, but it can actually be quite distracting when people are reading your communication. And finally, it can be difficult to read text which is spaced too narrowly or too wide. And on the right-hand side of my slide, you can see some small text with a vast amount of space between the lines of text and a very narrow sort of column width on the measure of that text. And beneath it, text that's set in a way that's a little bit more easy to read. So for optimal legibility, set lines of text that are comfortable reading with, neither too narrow, spanning the whole page, nor too narrow or too wide, spanning the whole page. And space these lines easefully, neither too tightly spaced together nor too loose. And that will help improve the legibility of the text that you're presenting in your VidsCom. When you're incorporating imagery or video, make sure you have permission to use it. Most of the time this means creating your own, buying from a stock library, asking permission of copyright holders, or using material which is under Creative Commons licenses. When you're searching the web for image material, you can find plenty of images under Creative Commons and the usage terms under which you're able to use them for your presentations. And after all those tips, it's really important to remember that communication pieces don't have to be slick. Homemade things often have a liveliness that's really engaging. And on my slide here, I have 3 examples of this. On the left, a sort of illustrated and handwritten type journal by the artist Jose Naranja. And on the right, we have some handwritten text and rough diagrams. And below that, pages from like a journal type diary with pictures and hand-drawn drawings entitled Eating on a Budget in Japan. And these are from visual graphic note-taking examples on the web. The references are in the transcript. So these show a very rich, handmade, hand-drawn, illustrated, rough presentation of information. And this can be a really effective way to present your information as well. So these are just some tips to get you started. And of course, all rules can be broken if that serves your purpose. So finally, when putting it together, For creating comms, there are lots of useful apps that you can design your pages in. Some well-known apps are Microsoft Word and PowerPoint, Apple Pages and Keynote, and the Adobe software. So we have Adobe Illustrator, Adobe InDesign, and Adobe Photoshop. Also excellent and less well-known is the Affinity software suite. Affinity Designer, Affinity Publisher, and Affinity Photo, which is an affordable selection of layout, graphics, and photo editing programs, which are powerful and easy to use. Affordable, much more affordable in comparison to the Adobe suite, for example, and it might suit your purposes. They all do similar things. On my slide here are the logos for all of those apps, and you can find all of those apps online. To make sure your comms reach a wide audience, make use of the many accessibility ideas and tools online so you can design and create your comms in a way that helps more people be able to engage with them. And there are some resources also in the transcript for that. When you've completed your piece of communication, output your final file as a PDF with the fonts embedded. So here's all of these apps on a black background, which is ending up in an arrow pointing to the PDF logo. Outputting a PDF with the fonts embedded will lock your elements in place and it will ensure reliable rendering on any system. So when you've made your presentation on your home computer and you take it into uni or another place to present it, if it's in PDF format, it will look the same on any other system as it did on your system when you created it. So this has been the design principles component of this 3-part Creative Comms crash course. We've looked at what VisComm is and what it can do. We've given 3 simple questions for getting clear about the purpose of a piece of communication. We've covered some practical design tips for putting your materials together and outlined some helpful bits of tech. I hope the ideas and the information has been useful for you. A transcript of the session, including links and resources, is available for download. And as the text on my slide here of some wattle close up from the original Acknowledgement of Country slide, it's down the road from my place, this wattle. As the text on this slide says in white, thank you. Thanks for sharing in this session. And I hope you'll also enjoy the other 2 components of this Creative Comms crash course.